Hey everyone, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you guys. Today in this one we're going to be taking another look at the metagame for another metagame analysis. So the last time we did one of these was just a little over a week ago, I think about a week and a half ago. It would have been at the end of Season 5. And we have definitely seen the meta shape up quite interestingly. More interestingly than you would think, I expect. Because, you know, obviously at the start of the season, it was like all Swordsoul, nothing but Swordsoul, right? But I noticed that very, very quickly, the metagame was actually developing around Swordsoul's popularity. Swordsoul obviously being, you know, a very good deck and the new deck on the block. A lot of people were flocking to try it and, you know, had been practicing, myself included, had been practicing it all of Season 5, and so we're eager to, very eager to use it to start going into Season 6. But again, I noticed even in the first night of climbing that the meta had already started to develop around Swordsoul. Particularly, we see the prevalence of these Eldritch decks right down here in Tier 3. I saw quite a few of those, and Eldritch has, I think, a fairly good matchup against Swordsouls Tenyi, particularly when they get to go first, because Swordsouls Tenyi can play going second fairly well, but if they're playing into a lot of back row, most variants, again, mine included, aren't playing Feather Duster or Lightning Storm, so they tend to struggle with more back row heavy decks in that regard. We then also have Virtual World here, who's benefiting from Swordsoul's popularity, because a lot of the cards that people are starting to play more of that counter Swordsouls are things like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence that negate on-board monster effects, because that's obviously really good against Swordsoul. You can negate a Moye that usually can stop an opponent in their tracks. Because they've used their normal summon already and they have a monster on the board, so they can't, you know, special summon like a Klesia or a Tenyi monster, and they're just kind of locked into that. But also is still useful for negating like a Chi Shao or Baron if you're going second. You know, Droplet can still be good in that regard. But then you have Virtual World, right? Which again benefits from those kind of you know, responses being popular, because Virtual World here doesn't really care about their onboard effects getting negated, right? They don't need effects on the board to really resolve for their combos. And if you try to do that to their VFD, well, then they'll just pop it with Choo-Choo. So in turn, I think I actually did allude to this in a previous video. I think if I did, it was only briefly. It might have even been in the last metagame analysis. I don't remember, actually, but I think I've said this before. We're finding ourselves in a bit of a rock, paper, scissors meta here between Zodiac Tri-Brigade, Swordsoul Tenyi, and then kind of like everything else, basically. But particularly Virtual World and the Eldritch variants, where, like, you know, Swordsouls Tenyi got really popular, and it has a good matchup against Tri-Zu. So we started to see Swordsoul rise up, like, on par with Tri-Zu, and even though Tri-Zu's power level didn't drop too much as far as like how many people were playing Tri-Zu versus Swordsoul out there, I think it was pretty clear there were far more Swordsoul players, right? And again, Swordsoul does tend to have tend to be favored in the matchup against Tri-Zu. But then, like I said, we have Eldritch and Virtual, which kind of crop up, and particularly Eldritch is a good matchup against Tenyi. But then it loops back around, because then Zodiac Tri-Brigade still has good matchups against everything else, like it did before Swordsouls Tenyi came out. Like, it's got, you know, of the top tier decks, Zodiac Tri-Brigade has a fairly decent Eldritch matchup, and it's got an alright Virtual World matchup. But yeah, so like I said, it ends up being kind of like a bit of a rock, paper, scissors thing, where it's like Swordsoul beats Tri-Zu, Tri-Zu beats everything else, and everything else is teched out or is being played specifically to beat Swordsoul. So that also illustrates the importance, and it's kind of something that I fell into the trap of doing at the start of the season, was like following the meta as opposed to trying to beat it. It's not that playing Swordsoul is wrong or was wrong of me to do, but I should have been considering, and I should have been looking out for players who were thinking ahead and trying to beat the meta as opposed to follow it. You know, people who are turning to Eldritch, and particularly Zombie World Eldritch. Zombie World obviously being very good against both Swordsouls Tenyi and Zodiac Tri-Brigade, being able to cut off, stop things from being worms or from tri-types. So that's why this variant in particular is now seeing a lot more play. So, and I think the reason that we're seeing Zodiac Tri-Brigade above Swordsouls Tenyi here is because Zodiac Tri-Brigade just does tend to be more flexible in its responses against even decks that are teched out to beat it, right? We're more often running the Harpy's Feather Duster and the Lightning Storm, but we're also running a lot of just really flexible slots because Swordsouls 10E is like Tri-Zoo in its resiliency through its combos, but they're still different in the way they go about it. They both require minimal investment into the combos, but Zodiac's Tri-Brigade is more of the extreme example of that, where we can make a combo play with just a Fractal, or we can make a Zeus play with just a Zodiac. Swordsouls 10E not only does require you to still have 2 cards to go off, but also you have to have a lot more invested main, and especially extra, but definitely main deck slots to make sure your combos go off. That's why Swordsouls 10E decks tend to go above 40 cards so often, is because you need to fit in your Swordsoul engine, your 10E engine, your Halcarorodon stuff, and also something to have responses on top of that. Zodiac Tri-Brigade is a lot more flexible in that regard, in that you can stay at 40 cards, have all your combo pieces, have all the hand traps you need, and honestly then some. Like, and I mean that, and then some. Like, you're spoiled for choice when it comes to your interrupting and hand trap plays with when you're playing Tri-Zoo. Definitely not as much as when you're playing Swordsouls 10E. So I guess I should have led by saying that's why I think Swordsouls 10E is still down here below Tri-Zoo, and probably why it's in tier 2. I mean, it's barely in tier 2 right now, right? 11.6. The threshold for the meta here is 12. I've noticed that there's no longer the option for a little while now to change from tournament to non-tournament mode. Maybe someone in the comments who's a little bit more familiar with Master Duel meta could tell me, does this mean that the tier list we're seeing reflected is now actually the one that is combined both like decks on ladder and in tournaments? That would be really cool if that were the case. But yeah, so as always, we're going to go ahead and take a look at each of the decks that appear here. Oh, the other thing, I knew there was one more thing I wanted to mention, which is the latest set release, Valiant Wings. Now, in contradiction, right? Did I say that right? Contradictory? No, yeah, in contradiction is kind of what this is saying. Yeah, we have a new set coming out, but... Whoops, I didn't mean to click that, sorry. Yeah, we do have a new set coming out, but I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact on this meta. We'll actually take a look at the new contents of the set here. I'll go over this briefly because I didn't make a dedicated video for this, but I think... Actually, the day this video is coming out, I think, is the day that this pack of Valiant Wings is being released. I hate to break it to you guys, I actually don't plan on doing a pack opening video for this one. I'm actually just going to continue to save my gems, I think, for the next pack. That's going to contain, well, that will very likely contain Adventure and Fluanderies. At this point in time, there's just not really anything that's being offered here that I'm too interested in. I have a passing interest in Exosister, you know, I won't deny that, and who knows, if I end up with like over 10k gems, then maybe I will invest in some of these packs, but Exosister, to be fair, they are an archetype. They are not an archetype I've done too much research in, so maybe I could do a bit of that. But yeah, I know they're mainly like graveyard hate kind of based, but not in the way that like Gravekeepers are. They're more like, well, I guess this Asfiel, she's kind of like that. Yeah, this one says you can't special summon from graveyards. This one, well, it negates monster effects on board, but the main one also can banish stuff from grave or on board. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not saying the archetype's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I do actually really like the art and the lore. I think that's cool, but probably not going to get into Exosisters myself. And then everything else that's in here is just kind of like, you know, either filler or just like passive support. I'm a little interested in the new Hyperion because I did actually really like the original Hyperion. When that structure deck came out, I was all over that agent deck, but I just don't think the deck's particularly great either. So yeah, I can't imagine I'm going to invest too much in these packs or these archetypes. So I'm sorry to disappoint if you were interested in seeing me play Exosisters. That's not to say I'll never play them, you know? It's definitely still open, but I'm not going to get into them right away. I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on laddering, I think, instead. So now let's go ahead and start looking at some of these breakdowns. And I usually do cuts, but I don't know. I've been thinking lately for these meta analysis, maybe cuts aren't necessary. We're just clicking over to another tab. We're not going to another game or something. So let's take a look at Tri-Zoo here. I am really kind of intrigued. I don't know if intrigued is even the right word. I think maybe validate is more the right word, by seeing these trends upward and downward. Well, validated for myself isn't really what I meant to say either. Particularly with Racevulgar, it makes me glad that I listened to you guys and put Appaloosa back in and took Racevulgar out, because that does seem to be the trend that we're seeing. And honestly, even playing Tri-Zoo since I've done that, I'm realizing now that even with DPE, you know, being a thing, it's still often enough that we're going into Appaloosa. And Racevulgar still is more of a niche option that we don't really see used too much. So I definitely think that's the right call here. Interesting to see that about 2/3 of the decks are playing the DPE engine. That's actually has been my experience playing on ladder. I think I stated in one of my Tri-Zoo videos, like, oh, if you're going to play Tri-Zoo, you should just play DPE. But, you know, having played against other Tri-Zoo decks that weren't using DPE, but were rather using more of, like, you know, the previous season's build, where they're still playing Tiger more, like basically just, yeah, using the previous season's build, I definitely still see the appeal in that. I gotta be honest with you, I really do. The deck still performs very solidly without DPE, and I definitely underestimated, maybe I don't know if it was overestimating DPE or underestimating what Tri-Zoo was capable of, but either way, I think I did slightly misevaluate in that regard. So, and we're seeing that reflected in the trend here. So, I also saw comments from you. It's funny, like, you guys are always just end up being right. I'll always see comments that'll allude to something that I end up coming to the realization myself of later. So, maybe I should just have more faith in you guys or something. Who knows? But, so yeah, like I said, we're seeing, obviously, the DPE engine is going to be upward trends. It seems to be settling at about 66%. I mean, a little bit under, but so about 2/3 of decks. Cataroost is still seeing more and more play, which is kind of interesting to me because I still think it's pretty niche. I'm still currently playing Whiptail over Cataroost because I mean, they're both niche options, but I still think Cataroost is a little bit more niche. I don't think it comes up quite as often as Whiptail, and I did play both a decent amount. But I might try Cataroost again, especially if the upward trend keeps going to the point where it surpasses Whiptail. Then I'll be more inclined to kind of reevaluate. And I know some of you might be thinking like, oh, did you just say you should stay ahead of the meta and not follow it? And, you know, generally speaking, yeah, you should try to stay ahead of it, but that doesn't mean we should always be, you know, trying new things, right? It is totally fine to settle into a build or settle into certain tech choices. And I think the best point to do that is when the data reflects that it's an optimal choice. So, you know, as I always do, I'll continue to monitor these trends here. Also, you know, we're seeing an upward trend in Effect Veiler being played. That doesn't really surprise me, as I alluded to earlier in the video. You know, Veiler and Imperm are both very, very good against Swordsouls, particularly going second. They're good hand traps. They tend to stop Swordsouls pretty nicely. And if you look here at Imperm and Droplet, I'm trying to remember exactly what the figures were. Like, go back a month ago. I'd be interested to go back a month ago and see what the figures looked like when we were in, as I now affectionately refer to it, at the beginning of Season 5, Drytron Hell. I think these stats were kind of the other way around, where it was like, you know, Droplet was like a 3 of and 50% of builds, and Imperm was a 2 of and 50% of builds. But, you know, we're definitely seeing the opposite happen. I know Droplet at one point was seeing mostly played as a 3 of in Tri-Zoo, again, back before Swordsouls came out and, you know, Drytron got hit. But definitely makes sense now that we're seeing more Imperms, again, because Swordsoul being kind of the new deck on the block, and also the other tier 1 deck, and also, as I mentioned before, a deck that Tri-Zoo, I don't think Tri-Zoo necessarily struggles in the matchup, but it does seem clear to me that Swordsouls tends to be favored in that matchup. That said, Droplet is still a fairly good card if you are going second. It's obviously not a hand trap, but you know, even the standard Swordsoul board ends on like Chi Shao and Baron, so just being able to negate multiple things that would negate your things is, as we've learned playing as Drytron, very, very nice. And Zodiac Tri-Brigade, of all decks that play Droplet, is probably one of the ones that can afford to spare the most resources in order to be able to do so. So, let's see. Rescue Cat, we're still seeing about 18%. I think that's exactly where it was at last time we looked. I mean, I still hold the same opinions as Rescue Cat as I have pretty much since DPE came out, and It seemed like more people were playing Rescue Cat in the Tri-Brigade variant, or the Zodiac variant of Tri-Brigades, I should say. Again, I don't think it's a bad card, and I think it's actually quite a good card. And I've seen some pretty compelling arguments in the comments for Rescue Cat. You know, I just don't have the room in my builds, and I don't have the desire to spend the Ultra Craft points to try out a card I don't think is going to be in my final build anyway. So that's still why I haven't played it just yet. But, you know, it's I hate that I always want to refer to this saying because it's obviously a memed Justin Bieber thing, but like never say never, you know. I'm not saying I'll never play Rescue Cat, and in general you should be open-minded to, you know, certain tech choices. So again, if the data reflects that Rescue Cat is the right way to go, then I'm certainly willing to, I guess, oblige in that regard. So what else am I noticing here? I mean, everything else still looks pretty standard here. I don't know that I have a whole lot else to say about good old Tri-Brigade Zodiac. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next breakdown here, which is going to be Swordsouls Tenyi. These numbers I don't think have changed really at all since we last looked at them, which isn't surprising. I think Swordsouls Tenyi tends to be fairly optimized as a deck. There are still obviously a lot of different ways you can build it. Swordsouls in general, not just Swordsouls Tenyi, but even Swordsouls Tenyi as well. But you know, we're seeing, like, for the most part, like it's everything that we would expect to see in the deck is seeing in play in like 80% or above of them, right? Like the Protoss, the Nibiru, the Deskbot, that whole Hulk line, and then obviously all these other cards are required for pretty much any Swordsoul deck. Crossout Designator, this number looks a little bit deceptive, but it's like, you know, 2 of in 42% of decks, and then 3 of in 30%. So it's also seeing play in about 80, actually 77% of Swordsoul decks, but I think that also tends to be because Crossout Designator as a non-archetype ultra rare might be used a bit less because of that, but it is also a staple, so maybe that isn't a factor. Who knows, you know, that's all just pure speculative, but I'm still liking 3 in my build. I kind of think 3 is still the way to go, but I could also see going down to 2 if the meta continues to trend in a way where we're seeing more decks like Zombie World Eldritch that are kind of like, you know, here to beat Swordsouls Tenyi, and then in turn more Trizu in order to beat those decks. In general, I guess I'm saying if we start to see less Swordsouls decks on ladder, then maybe it is right to go back down to 2 Crossout Designator. As we all know from our last couple of videos, I am finally above 40 cards. I'm playing 41, which I actually didn't even notice till just now is actually the average size of the deck. So I still like to play as close to 40 as possible. 40 is just, you know, it's nice. It's going to keep your deck consistent, and particularly opening hand traps is one reason I like to stay at 40 cards to increase my odds of that. But I definitely don't mind going to 41. I could even see a world where I go to 42. That's probably if I want to try out like Heavenly Dragon Circle or something, but I don't feel particularly inclined to add it at this point in time. Same with like Shathana. I'd probably actually be more likely to add Shathana than Heavenly Dragon Circle. I don't know. I still might try one of these 2 cards out, but at this time I don't particularly feel the need to go out of my way to include them. And then as far as like extra deck options go, we're still seeing, you know, again, the same extra deck here, and then this last flex spot is like, again, my flex spot at this point in time is still Borreload Savage Dragon, but we're also seeing Herald of the Arclight, we're seeing Dragite, we're seeing Crimson Blader. I've been considering switching back over to Dragite, but yeah, I don't know, the 15th extra deck spot in this deck is really quite interesting. It's just funny how the main deck is so tight on space you often go above 40, but the extra deck, you really have 14 that you need. And then that last, that last 15th spot is just such an enigma to me. I'm still trying to figure it out. As always, if you have suggestions or things that have been working for you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. I've almost been thinking about making like an access code talker, because there's been enough times where like I'm left with an Auroradon and one other monster, even by like the next turn, and I'm just like, yeah, we could just go into an access code. So who knows? We'll figure it out. Again, if you have suggestions, I'd love to hear from you. But not much else has really changed about Swordsouls Tenyi, so I don't know that we need to linger on it for too much longer here. Virtual World. So Virtual World has honestly not really changed a whole lot either. Virtual World isn't really teching anything in particular in order to keep up with the meta. It's just by nature of how the deck tends to be. Again, being able to play fairly well around just like the kind of onboard monster effect negation that's seeing a lot of play because of Swordsouls Tenyi right now. So in that regard, it just naturally kind of plays well into the meta. There is also the fact we have to remember too that of the decks that did get touched by the ban list, Virtual World definitely got away the least scathed, the most unscathed. I wonder how you would say that. But anyway, and I kind of talked about that before. This was, before we knew the new set was going to come out. But I talked about that, how as a result, I expected to see Virtual World, see more play. And it does, I would consider that to also be a contributing factor as well. So Virtual World has actually managed to hold on to its position, where it's at pretty well. So props to that deck there. I don't know. I just don't really have a whole lot else to say about the deck because I haven't played it yet myself, and I feel like I'm such a tease when it comes to people who want to see me play Virtual World, because I've for so long been like, maybe I might try it. I don't know. If I end up with an excess amount of materials, I mean, even for me speaking, because I'm starting to get to that point, I might. Here I go again. I'm doing the exact same thing I just complained about myself doing. Just know that Virtual World is an eternal maybe for me. It is on the list, the proverbial list of decks that I intend to get to at one point or another. Rest assured, Virtual World is still there, so let's leave Virtual World for the time being and move on to Zombie World Eldritch. Now, this is an example more of a deck that is teching things specifically against the meta, particularly the aforementioned Zombie World. So this card obviously very, very good against this meta right now because of one of the top two decks, Tri-Brigade Zodiac and Swordsouls Tenyi. And what do both of those decks have in common? Well, their effects very much rely on having certain types of monsters, right? So for example, obviously with Tri-Zoo we have to banish the Tri-types, being Beast, Beast Warrior, and Winged Beast. We have to banish Tri-types out of our graveyard to summon the Link monsters. And similarly with it's more with Swordsouls Tenyi. I think it more has to do with like extra deck requirements, right? Like Chi Shao and Baxia both require worm monsters, and I think to an extent too there are some main deck I should know that off the top of my head. I really should. I think it's mostly just that it stops you from going into Chi Shao and Baxia. I actually haven't played against the does it stop Yazzie as well? No, Yazzie's generic. This one also generic, yeah, but it's mainly these two. And also the monk too. Or not the monk, the shaman is what I meant to say. It also stops the Hulk Auroradon line because you can't go into Auroradon. So that's not quite as devastating as Tri-Zoo, unlike Tri-Zoo not Virtual World, Swordsouls Tenyi might still be able to play through like a zombie world, but for the most part it does still stop them pretty well. So that's why Eldritch, and particularly this variant of Eldritch, is seeing more play. Also, as I alluded to earlier, decks with a lot of back row, like more stun type decks like Eldritch, just tend to have a better matchup against Swordsouls Tenyis, because again, Swordsouls Tenyi tends to not play too many answers for a lot of back row, so can have a hard time fighting against those. And unless you're playing like a Desires or something, it can even be hard to run over like a buffed Eldritch sometimes, or deal with like this maybe not the Doom King, but why did I say Doom King? I meant more like the Gustav Max and the Liebe here. There have been a couple of games where I played against Eldritch where like they summon big monsters like this, and I'm just like, I can't out that. That's another reason why I like having Borload, is because it can go up to 4,050 attack points, which can out the not only this but the Infinite Track in the Eldritch matchup, which is another like common big threat. Again, unless you're running Desires, in which case it's pretty easy to buff a Cheng Ying. But that is something that I've just observed playing Swordsouls Tenyi, that sometimes stats do end up mattering, just depending on the matchup. Can't really speak to the trends for this deck too much. I'm not really, obviously I don't play this deck, and It's a relatively new deck on the block in terms of being on the tier list, so I think a lot of these trends are still really malleable. Especially in the extra deck is always the case with Eldritch. We can just go over to, like, you know, quote-unquote regular Eldritch here as well. Of course, there's a Lord of the Heavenly Prison as well. So, looks like it's seeing play in about 75% of decks altogether. I'd be willing to bet if it was a Super, not an Ultra, that it'd be seeing play in, like, 100% of Eldritch decks. Maybe not 100, but probably, like, somewhere probably between 90 and 95. I was going to say 85 and 90, but it's probably closer to 90. Anyway, that's all speculative, though. The point I'm getting at is I would definitely expect that number to be higher if it weren't like another set of ultra rares to craft for the deck. So I think that's why the number is... It would kind of see the same thing happen with, like, Vanity's Emptiness, right? Where, like, more than 45% of Eldritch decks should probably just be playing the Vanity's Emptiness, but because it's an ultra rare and it's a relatively flexible spot in the deck, like, the deck can definitely get away without playing the one Vanity's Emptiness. It tends to not see as much play, again, because it's an ultra. And I suspect the same thing is happening with Lord of the Heavenly Prison as well, why we're seeing, like, 3 of and only 46% of decks and 75% of decks using it overall. Again, I'd be willing to bet that if it were a lower rarity, we would be seeing much, much, much higher play rates for Heavenly Prison. The card's really annoying too to play against, having played again against a fair number of Eldritch decks so far. Yeah, definitely an annoying card to play against. So, all right, let's see, what else do we have here? Ad-Ignister. I have actually been seeing more Ad-Ignisters in the ladder in the last, like, week or two, mostly in the last week. This is yet another deck that I don't know too much about, so I can't speak to if it's, like, just poised well in the meta. I mean, honestly, I think Ad-Ignister has always floated around the tier 3 level. It just maybe hasn't been seeing as much play. But I do think the deck is seeing more play now. I wish I could pinpoint a specific reason. I wonder if it's just because it happens to have good matchups against the meta decks. I actually haven't because even though I've been seeing it more often, I still haven't played against it too much myself. Anyone who plays Ad-Ignister, feel free to chime in the comments and how you feel about the deck's matchups and maybe if that's why it's seeing an increase of play, because I've been seeing it pretty steadily appear here on the tier 3 spot in the list here, which again, I have always thought Ad-Ignister was that. I just didn't think it actually had the actual play rate or representation to end up there, but it looks like that is... yeah, looks like that's not the case, as obviously we see it right here. I still need to get more practice in against this deck just to figure out how to play against them better. I know this Dark Infant Agnister tends to be the choke point, basically stopping them from getting AI land. That's my best advice I can offer to you. If you can stop them from getting their Agnister AI land, then they are definitely going to have a much harder time winning the game. From my experience, I'm not an Agnister player, but that's just what I've tended to observe. This is actually another deck I've kind of thought about dabbling into, because, I mean, if we look at the list here, well, I guess I would have to craft Signet Minings, but in the extra deck, it's, like, just 2 cards, so 5 altogether is definitely not too bad. And I like the deck's playstyle. It definitely seems like a lot of fun. So, yeah. Again, if anyone in the comments is more familiar with Ad-Ignister and can offer more insights into maybe why it's seeing more play, or why if it is poised well in the meta, why it is, I would be very interested to hear from you. But in the meantime, we've just got one more deck here, which is Prank Kids. There's actually not really too many difference, or too much of a difference here to Prank Kids. Looks like it's just really the inclusion of the DPE engine. It looks like people are starting to drop the Totally Awesome for the DPE, which I guess I could see, but I'm trying to remember actually what I dropped for DPE now that I think about it. I don't recall off the top of my head. so it probably wasn't important, no. Oh, I think it was a Nightmare Phoenix or something like that. It was something kind of random that I was running in place of, like, a second Battle Butler. So really in my build, if you're comparing it to a more quote-unquote traditional build, I'm playing the DPE over the second Battle Butler instead of the Totally Awesome, which seems like more people are taking out, which does make sense to me. You know, I don't tend to go into Totally Awesome too much when I'm playing Prank Kids. It's a very nice option to have, but it's definitely not needed by any means, so yeah, it might even be right to drop Totally Awesome as opposed to the second Battle Butler, which might actually just mean it's just time for me to craft my second Butler. Who knows? We'll cross that road when we get there, but yeah, not too much else to say really about Prank Kids, as again, we're not seeing really too many more noticeable trends, except maybe the ghost spells. I think these have actually been here for a little while now, even before like Swordsouls started to come out. As Prank Kids, you know, being a deck that can have a lot of one-card combos does tend to run more varied disruption options. So, but Ghost Spell is still a very, very good tech option in this meta. Not even just in this meta, but in general. It was still a good tech option in the last meta too, but obviously the prevalence of DPE does add a much needed target for Ghost Spell to see more widespread play. So yeah, I think that's about all I've got to say about that deck breakdown, as well as the tier list in general. So yeah, again, interesting spot we're in right now, even though, again, very technically Swordsouls Tenyi is tier 2 because it's 11.6 and the minimum threshold is 12. I would still consider Swordsouls Tenyi to be a tier 1 deck. Interesting to see that we're not seeing Phantom Knights like I expected we would in the last metagame analysis. I am a little bit disappointed in that, obviously not only just because my my prediction wasn't too on point, but also because, you know, I really like Phantom Knights as a deck in general. I think a lot of people are also teching against DPE, not just against Swordsouls Tenyi, which is why I think maybe Prank Kids and Phantom Knights aren't seeing as much play as I thought they would. They'll definitely see more play when Adventure stuff comes out, from what I hear though. So, and from what I've been researching and observed myself too. So. For the time being, I think, you know, we still got Tri-Zoo and Swordsouls Tenyi as our firm tier 1 decks. I had Swordsouls Tenyi pinned as the better of the two, but I think with more people teching against them now, it's a little bit more even. I think they're both about the same spot on the tier 1 list. As far as what's tier 2 right now, again, even though it's technically tier 3 due to how the site measures power levels, I would very much consider Virtual World and the Eldritch variants to be a tier 2, our tier 2 decks right now. I could even see an argument for maybe something like Sky Striker also being tier 2, maybe, because that can run DPE effectively and also like has a lot of good disruption against like Swordsouls Tenyi and stuff. But we don't see them represented here, and I don't see them represented quite as frequently as I did before on the ladder in the last, like, you know, few days. So yeah, I think Sky Striker is probably a tier 3 deck still, now that I think about it. And then also I was getting at Adagnister, Prank Kids, Phantom Knights. I think those are pretty solid tier 3 decks. Emancipator, I still suspect is still probably a solid tier 3 deck. Again, I think with that one, it's just not seeing, it's just a matter of people aren't playing the deck. It's not a matter of the deck's power level being so low that people aren't playing it. It's that people, I think so few people are playing the deck that its power level isn't getting accurately reflected. That's just my opinion, though. I still think Emancipator is a solid tier 3 deck. I'm trying to think of other decks I would pin on tier 3. Let me think. Oh, like Lyrilusk. Yeah, Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk I would call a tier 3 deck. I just glanced at like the Master Duel Discord there because they have their own kind of tier rankings in the channels there. Yeah, Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk is a pretty solid tier 3 deck. IDS... Wait, is that the Invoke Dogmatica Shadal? Yeah, IDS variants. Yeah, those are still pretty solidly tier 3 as well. Winda is just always a good card, so... Danger Kaiju, which again I see a lot of at the start of a season when I'm laddering, I think is also another pretty solid tier 3 deck. That one, that's now where we're kind of in the territory where we're bordering more into Rogue, but... I think you can make an argument for Danger Kaiju being tier 3. But yeah, so that's pretty much all I've got for you for this metagame analysis. It's nice to see the meta and the tier list more defined. That last one, or no, I don't think it was the last one. No, I'm sorry, it was the last metagame analysis we did, where we got a bit speculative. Again, I tend to prefer to keep these analysis videos more objective than speculative, just because I find that to be more helpful. Again, that is more kind of the trend of following the meta than trying to beat it, but you gotta know what's in the meta and have accurate information in that regard in order to be able to counter it effectively. So that's why I think it's important to report on what is happening in a more objective stance, as opposed to being like, I think this is this tier because of this reason. So yep, I think that's about all I have to say for the time being. So everyone, I want to thank you very much for watching to the end of the video. As always, I am very greatly appreciative of that, and I'm even more appreciative of those of you who decide to leave comments and or subscribe. I love interacting with you guys in the comments. I just love getting your guys' input, and I to this day, I still say I think I have one of the best YouTube comment sections I've ever seen. I really mean that. I don't say it just because you're my, or I don't even like saying my comment section, because I like to more think of it as our channel. But you guys are just so good with the constructive criticism and offering good feedback. It's really nice to hear from you all. It really is. And then, yeah, if you want to keep up with the videos, the best way to do that is to go ahead and subscribe there. So then you'll get to see when my daily videos come out, well, every day. So, okay, that's about all I've got for today. Without further ado, this is Hexlex signing out, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day.